When we think of wealthy nations, our minds naturally gravitate toward the large, powerful, and resource-rich countries that dominate the global stage. The United States, China, Germany, Japan. These are the economic powerhouses that shape the global economy, the nations that command attention, wield influence, and define the terms of global trade and finance. We assume that size, resources, and population are the keys to wealth, that a nation must be large and powerful to be prosperous, and that the economic dominance of these major powers is a natural and inevitable consequence of their scale and strength. But this assumption is dramatically wrong. It is contradicted by the extraordinary success of a handful of tiny countries that have become some of the richest nations on earth. Luxembourg, Singapore, Switzerland, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Norway, and Monaco are all small nations that have achieved extraordinary levels of wealth and prosperity, defying conventional wisdom that size and resources are the keys to economic success. These countries are small in terms of land area, small in terms of population, and often small in terms of natural resources. And yet, they have become some of the richest nations on earth, with per capita incomes that far exceed those of the larger powers. The success of these tiny countries is a paradox, a puzzle that defies the conventional wisdom and challenges our understanding of how wealth is created and sustained. The world has been told a simple story, that size matters, that resources matter, and that a large and powerful nation is naturally more prosperous than a small and weak one. But this story is a lie. Tiny countries can become extremely rich, and they can do so without the advantages of size, population, or natural resources. They do so by leveraging their unique strengths, by making strategic choices, and by creating environments that are attractive to talent, investment, and innovation. The success of these small nations is a testament to the power of human ingenuity, political will, and strategic vision. It is a story of how small nations can outcompete the giants, and of how the rules of the global economy can be rewritten by the most unlikely players. To understand how tiny countries become extremely rich, we must first travel back in time to an era when the world was dominated by large empires and when small nations were at the mercy of the powerful. The ancient and medieval worlds were worlds of empires, where the Roman, Chinese, Persian, and Byzantine empires dominated the known world, and where small nations were often conquered, absorbed, or marginalized by the powerful. The idea that a small nation could be a major economic player was unimaginable, a fantasy that was beyond the reach of the tiny states that dotted the map. The modern era began with the rise of the nation-state and the emergence of a new global order. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 established a modern system of sovereign states, and the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century transformed the global economy. The rise of capitalism, the expansion of global trade, and the emergence of new technologies created new opportunities for small nations as the barriers to wealth and power began to fall. The small nations of Europe, including Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the Nordic countries, began to challenge the dominance of the large powers, leveraging their strategic positions, their skilled workforces, and their innovative economies to compete on the global stage. The 20th century was a time of unprecedented change, as the global economy was transformed by war, technological innovation, and the rise of new economic powers. The small nations of the world began to carve out niches in the global economy, specializing in high-value industries, financial services, and technology. The rise of Singapore, Hong Kong, and the Gulf states was a testament to the power of strategic vision, good governance, and global integration. The tiny countries that had once been the pawns of the great powers began to emerge as major players in the global economy. The 21st century is a century of the tiny, rich nation. The rise of globalization, the growth of the knowledge economy, and the increasing importance of technology and innovation have created new opportunities for small nations. The tiny countries that have embraced these opportunities have become some of the richest nations on earth, and their success is a model for the rest of the world. The hidden power of tiny, rich nations lies in their ability to leverage their small size to create a competitive advantage and to make strategic choices that attract investment, talent, and innovation. The success of these nations is not an accident. It is a deliberate strategy, a carefully crafted approach to economic development that is based on a deep understanding of the global economy and the unique strengths of the tiny nation. The first layer is financial services. Luxembourg, Singapore, Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands have become global financial centers, attracting trillions of dollars in investment and providing a safe and secure environment for banking and asset management. The concentration of financial services in these tiny nations has created a powerful economic ecosystem that generates immense wealth and provides a stable source of income. The second layer is strategic location. Singapore, Hong Kong, and the UAE have leveraged their strategic locations to become global hubs of trade and commerce. Singapore's location at the crossroads of Asia has made it a vital link in the global supply chain, a place where goods are transshipped, processed, and redistributed. The UAE's location at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa has made it a global hub of commerce and tourism. The third layer is favorable tax regimes. Monaco, the Cayman Islands, and Switzerland have created tax regimes that attract wealthy individuals and corporations from around the world. The low tax rates, the stable political environment, and the high quality of life have made these tiny nations a magnet for the world's wealthiest individuals and most successful corporations. The fourth layer is high-quality institutions. Singapore, Switzerland, and Norway have built high-quality institutions that are transparent, efficient, and free from corruption. The rule of law, the protection of property rights, and the quality of the public services have created a stable and predictable environment that is attractive to investment and innovation. The fifth layer is human capital. Singapore, Switzerland, and Norway have invested heavily in education, creating a skilled and adaptable workforce that is capable of competing in the global economy. The investment in human capital has created a virtuous cycle of innovation and growth, as the skilled workforce attracts investment, and the investment creates new opportunities. The success of tiny, rich nations is not just a local phenomenon. The ripple effects of their success are felt across the globe, as their economic power, political influence, and cultural values shape the global order. The tiny, rich nations are not just small countries. They are global players, and their influence is growing. The first ripple is the shift in the global balance of power. The rise of tiny, rich nations has challenged the dominance of the large powers, creating a more multipolar world in which small nations can exert significant influence. The power of the tiny, rich nations is a reminder that size is not the only measure of power, and that the rules of the global economy can be rewritten by the most unlikely players. The second ripple is the globalization of finance. The financial services industries of Luxembourg, Singapore, and Switzerland have become global, connecting the world's capital markets and facilitating the flow of investment and trade. The globalization of finance has created new opportunities for growth, but it has also created new risks, as the global financial system has become more interconnected and more vulnerable to shocks. The third ripple is the globalization of talent. The tiny, rich nations have become magnets for global talent, attracting the world's most skilled and ambitious individuals. The concentration of talent in these tiny nations has created a powerful economic ecosystem that is capable of generating immense innovation and growth. The globalization of talent is reshaping the global economy, as the most talented individuals are drawn to the places where they can make the greatest impact. The fourth ripple is the spread of best practices. The success of the tiny, rich nations has inspired other countries to emulate their models, to adopt their policies, and to create similar environments for investment, innovation, and growth. The spread of best practices is creating a virtuous cycle of improvement, as the lessons of the tiny, rich nations are applied to other countries. The success of the tiny, rich nations is not without its challenges. The small size of these nations creates a host of vulnerabilities, and their continued success depends on their ability to adapt to the changing circumstances of the global economy. The tiny, rich nations face a critical challenge: to maintain their competitive advantage in a rapidly changing world. The first challenge is the risk of economic concentration. The economies of the tiny, rich nations are often concentrated in a few sectors, making them vulnerable to shocks in those sectors. The financial crises of the past decade have demonstrated the risks of over-reliance on financial services, and the tiny, rich nations must diversify their economies to reduce their vulnerability. The second challenge is the risk of political instability. The political stability of the tiny, rich nations is essential to their economic success, and any disruption to that stability could have devastating consequences. The tiny, rich nations must maintain their political stability and their commitment to good governance to continue to attract investment and talent. The third challenge is the risk of social inequality. The economic success of the tiny, rich nations has often been accompanied by growing social inequality, as the benefits of growth have been concentrated in the hands of a few. The tiny rich nations must address the growing inequality to maintain social cohesion and political stability. The fourth challenge is the risk of environmental degradation. The tiny rich nations are not immune to the environmental challenges of the 21st century, including climate change, resource scarcity, and pollution. The tiny rich nations must address these environmental challenges to ensure their long-term sustainability. The future of the tiny rich nations is a future of uncertainty, a future that is shaped by the choices that they make today. Two paths lie ahead, two completely different destinies. In the first path, the tiny rich nations adapt to the challenges of the 21st century, diversifying their economies, maintaining their political stability, addressing social inequality, and embracing environmental sustainability. They continue to thrive as global economic powerhouses, models of prosperity and sources of innovation and influence. In the second path, the tiny rich nations fail to adapt, overwhelmed by the challenges of economic concentration, political instability, social inequality, and environmental degradation. Their competitive advantage is eroded, their influence wanes, and they're overtaken by larger, more dynamic economies. The question is not whether tiny countries can become rich. The question is whether they can stay rich. The map never lies, but the people drawing it always have a reason. We just saw why tiny countries become extremely rich. But there is one tiny country quietly building a new model of wealth. That is the next journey. Which future do you believe? Comment Future 1 or Future 2. And subscribe to Atlas Beyond so you never miss the next journey.